Welcome everyone. So this presentation is about how we think about and define autism, and disability generally. The conceptions of autism that you put in the chat will differ depending on whether you are neurodiverse, have family who are autistic, or get a lot of your knowledge from the media or common presumptions about autism. When I was about 16, an occupational therapist carried out an assessment on me where they heard about the fact that I struggled socially, that I had trouble walking in a straight line, and that my spatial reasoning abilities were a bit unpredictable. So they heard all of this and then they went away and wrote a report. And a few weeks later, they sent it back to my parents with the report concluding that Alex has a mental ability akin to that of a 9-year-old. Now, what this assessment and report did is it measured me against a trajectory of normal development for neurotypical people and used that to mark me out as different or in some way wrong. What this highlights is that how we are diagnosed and how our condition is often thought about is something that is often done to us as a community rather than with us. And by as a community, I refer to the disabled community as a whole. My condition is autism, so that's what this presentation largely focuses around. However, this can be applied to a range of disabilities and experiences. The model my occupational therapist was using is called the medical model of disability. With limited tools to make organisations better equipped to understand and deal with disability, they can often default back to the medical model, which positions the problem within our bodies and minds, making it seem as if our struggles are something that we are inherently born with. And of course, from this, the conclusion that follows is that autistic people, disabled people, need to be fixed or changed in some way and need to be made to adapt to society or to their institutions better. The world around them doesn't need to change, says the medical model. The person needs to change. So any suggestions of curing autism are using the medical model. However, that's quite an extreme position today. So it tends to manifest in much more subtle ways. So it manifests when a building doesn't have a wheelchair ramp. It manifests when you hear autism talked about in the media as a problem or a tragedy for parents. And it manifests when you see the media or public figures talk about a sick note culture and a culture of people being made to depend on a system and using their disability to take advantage of that system. I was taught through medical professionals that I needed to learn eye contact, to not talk about my special interests of like music too much. I was also taught that my autism involved a lack of ability to feel empathy or emotion. It's taken me a long time to accept that flapping my hands, pacing on the spot, and talking about my special interests are not wrong aspects of my personality, but are instead the aspects that make me unique and give me a sense of identity. It's also taken me a long time to unlearn the belief that I can't feel empathy. As ridiculous as that might sound, you get told these things from an early age, and then you begin to internalize those beliefs about yourself. In fact, I often have an overwhelming visceral response to seeing, for example, injustice in the world. And I care deeply for my friends and feel an overwhelming sense of empathy often. So the process of unlearning these beliefs about myself has been a long one, and one that has involved a lot of coming to understand my condition and my autism for itself. This is what viewing autism, primarily in medical terms, does to people. To be eligible for support, we often must exaggerate the aspects of ourselves that are negative, and to exaggerate what we struggle with, and to hone in on our bad experiences. Whereas the rest of the time, often in workplaces or just in society as a whole, we're expected not to focus on what we struggle with, not to kick up a fuss, but to keep our head down and to behave as if we are completely normal, to mask, to camouflage, as the term that under the rhetoric goes. The medical model locates the problems of disability inside our bodies and minds, and in doing so obscures the social factors that make our lives harder, the factors that disable us, if you will. So what's the alternative? How can we move to a better model of seeing disability? This is the social relational model, which views disability as something that is done to someone when society or institutions don't adapt to meet their needs. Now, a criticism that the social model gets is that it ignores the very real struggles that come with disability, but it doesn't. And it doesn't do this in that it distinguishes a disability from an impairment. So an impairment can be the direct and unavoidable effects of your condition. However, just because of those effects, you are not necessarily disabled. Nobody is born disabled, but people with impairments or neurological conditions become disabled due to the limitations society places on them. And autistic people often struggle with mental health difficulties. Often this goes overlooked and ignored. Many people on the spectrum are isolated from society, and I saw through as a volunteer for autistic adults working for an organization called Dimensions that many are often forced to live like on the fringes of society, never really allowed to make friends or participate in society in a meaningful way because of the way our society is set up to only accommodate for certain needs and certain ways of thinking about the world. a big thing for me in helping us to achieve a more social relational model in how we shape our institutions is public space. So we have seen a decline in the how public space is valued, and many public spaces. So this could be something as simple as green space or libraries or social clubs. We have seen that disappearing from our town centres and local communities. And this has affected everyone in society to some extent, but it has particularly affected autistic and disabled people in that previously these places served to provide a lifeline for people on the spectrum, disabled people, to be able to access support, find friends or community, or organise for better conditions. The disappearance of that has accelerated and exacerbated the isolation a lot of autistic and disabled people were already facing in their lives. So what we most need to do is to reframe the definition of disability as something that is imposed on people through social and economic constraints. For example, lack of access to transport, housing, and recreation. There could be multiple examples of good practice, and I'm interested to hear what examples of good practice you're following in your organisation. But it could be something as simple as thinking about how we design our towns and cities, like I was saying before, a focus on social prescribing and a focus within workplaces on making sure reasonable adjustments are in place in order to enable autistic people and disabled people to fully participate in society. So I want to do a quick thought experiment now, and I want you to imagine a world where autistic people are the majority. How might we talk in this scenario about autism, or rather, how might we talk about the people that are in the minority, in the world we currently live in? Actually, the neurotypicals, you couldn't really call them the neurotypicals in this sort of experiment. So what might we think about the, let's call them holistics of the world? You may find that the holistic person in your life has a desire to be the same as everyone else, to homogenize their behavior in order to fit in. You may find the holistic person in your life is emotionally reserved and non-sentimental. You may find they express a lack of intense interests and obsessions. This lack of special interests is concerning in that they may never develop the same intense fascination that you do with a subject. Holistic people display a concerning absence of stimming or self-stimulatory behaviors, for example, pacing and hand flapping. The holistic person in your life also exhibits a strange tendency to filter out sensory input and information from the world, and doesn't simply experience everything all the time as you do. The holistic person in your life also communicates in a series of vague social cues, often, and has a seemingly strange desire to maintain constant eye contact. The holistic person in your life may often not obsess over problems or social issues, and they may tend to not always tell the full, unfiltered truth. Here at the Cognitive Understanding Research Enterprise, we believe in a world where everyone can live in harmony and understanding by all pretending to be normal. Now, I want you to either put in chat or just shout out, how did that activity, that thought experiment, make you feel?
Okay, I'm going to have to shout out on this one, Alex.
Yeah.
I've been through similar thought experiments before.
Yeah.
They are really powerful, but I absolutely loved your cognitive understanding research enterprise here, because so many of the research projects assume we need to be cured or eradicated by selection.
Yeah, absolutely.
Genetic testing pre-birth.
This was
class. Well done.
That was a deliberate attempt to parody those sort of research organisations that you refer to. So yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that. Anyone else?
Can I come in? I was really interested in this, and I just think the social model of disability makes so much more sense than the medical model. And just looking at that list now, there's a guy who lives in my village, and he's sort of gradually become more sort of inside himself sort of things. And we keep saying, come out with this, do that and things. And I recognise a lot of that in him. And now I'm thinking, right, okay, cool, thank you. That's really helped me in my personal life and also my work life.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. I also see someone's put in the chat how this is turning how we often see autism discussed on its head. That is the intention. And by the way, a lot of these points may seem stereotypical, both of autistic behaviours and of holistic or neurotypical behaviours. That's very intentional in order to emphasise how the way we often talk about human behaviour is often through this quite narrow prism where we assume there is such a thing as normal behaviour or a normal way to be. Some really good stuff coming in on through the chat. Keep putting your comments in there, because we'll collate this later and analyze it. But yeah, some really interesting stuff here, and some really interesting personal stories, like from Vicky and Timothy and Collis as well. Thank you very much, all of you. So the main point I want you to take away from this presentation is what and how you measure is what matters. Autistic people are often measured against a given ratio of how well they can appear normal and how well they can function in a neurotypical society. Our condition is often defined as being something incredibly negative that we ourselves are expected to emphasize in order to receive support, whereas the rest of the time we're expected to mask and camouflage and pretend we're not autistic or not get in people's way. And yet how autism often gets defined often depends on who gets to do the defining and how adaptable our institutions are to the needs of autistic people. Considering the range of social barriers that works to disable us, it makes sense that the overwhelmingly neurotypical medical professionals in this area would like to see autism as something inherently problematic, something that's just a flaw within our brains, within our bodies. A better approach might be to ask how well our systems work to give people lives of dignity, lives of respect, where they're not asked to prove that they're disabled enough in order to receive vital support. Furthermore, disabled people of all kinds should be allowed to play an active role in being allowed to define what their condition is and being able to redefine their lives. The social relational model provides a pathway for us to begin to change the narrative around what disability is and who gets to decide what disability is. But as well as new ways of thinking about the concept of disabilities, we need new ways of thinking about the concept of autistic behaviour and disability generally. So media sympathetic to autistic people will often say that autistic people often exhibit savant-like behaviours, and some of them can go on to achieve great careers in the medical world or data or mathematics. And that's all very kind and well-intentioned. But the truth is that most people generally, and most autistic people, won't go on to become super geniuses. Someone put superhuman in the chat at the beginning, and I'm not blaming you for doing that, because that's often a conception we see around autism. But we don't need to be superhuman, and many of us don't want that. We want to live ordinary lives, to have friends, to interact with society, and to do that in a way that doesn't make us feel discriminated or doesn't make us feel the need to hide our true self. We don't want to sacrifice the aspects that make us unique or go to effort to not get in people's way. We want to enjoy all the benefits of society and create new ones, irrespective of who we are, and well, not irrespective, but with the full knowledge of who we are and able to participate in society through that. I can't count how many times I've had to censor the amount of times I talk about something that I'm interested in, or deliberately restrained myself from stimming in order to fit in. We don't want to be savants. We just want to go about our lives free to stim, free to talk about our special interests, and free to be autistic. Thank you. Thank you everyone for listening. We're going to go to questions now. So if anybody has any questions, either put them in the Q&A box, and we will get to, we will try and answer as many as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I think, yeah, I mean, I've heard you do this presentation a couple of times now, but I still learn something new, I think, each time. So thank you. We have had a few questions in, so if I just kick things off while people are thinking, and as Alex said, feel free to pop them in the Q&A or just raise your hand and unmute yourselves, and happy for you to ask the question. So Alex, this month is Disability Pride Month. Do you see campaigns like this as important in increasing understanding about issues related to autism and disability?
I do, and I think the focus on pride is an important one. I think, like we were saying before, where I was poking fun slightly at the campaigns to sort of cure autism, I think we need to be careful about what those campaigns are, and that in doing those campaigns, we're not treating autism as a disease or something that is bad, but that's why I like the pride phrase, because it emphasizes the importance of that you should be allowed to show pride in your disability and or your autism and who you are.
Great, thanks, Alex. Let me just, so we've had another question in. So you touched on the connection between the struggles experienced by people on the spectrum and people in the LGBTQ plus community. Can you go into a bit more detail about that, please?
Yeah, I can do. So this is something I'm just sort of like learning about myself. In this presentation, I talked about unlearning a lot of what you're taught to believe when you are younger. So I actually came out as bisexual over lockdown at in my mid-20s, and I'd just gone through my life up until that point assuming that I was straight, and that ties into autism in the sense that many people are taught to believe that those aspects of themselves are wrong in some way. There's a big controversy over conversion therapy specifically, and how wrong it is, and the fact that many autistic people experience forms of conversion therapy, or in the same way as many LGBTQ plus people unfortunately have to go through that. And so, yeah, we've seen throughout history how different sexualities, different gender identities have been pathologized in the same way as we pathologize disability. So I think that the struggles for disability liberation and queer liberation go hand in hand in that sense, really. So.